China builds a car in 18 months. While some legacy brands are still arguing about the shape of a headlight after 3 years of meetings. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual gap right now. And it's not luck. It's not even really about cheap labor anymore, though that's the excuse you'll hear at every dealership and every pub car park debate in the UK. It's a system. A properly engineered system, built for one purpose, to make sure that by the time a German or a Japanese manufacturer finishes designing a car, a Chinese one has already built it, sold it, updated it, and started designing the replacement. Let's start with the bit nobody wants to say out loud. China didn't catch up by accident. It caught up because it changed the rules of the game while everyone else was still playing the old one. Think about how a traditional car gets made. Design freeze, years of testing, supplier negotiations that drag on and on, then finally a launch, usually with a facelift already planned for 4 years down the line because, let's be honest, that's how long it'll take before anyone updates the tech inside it. Now look at a brand like BYD or NIO or Zeekr. Software updates roll out like your phone gets them. The infotainment isn't an afterthought bolted on by a supplier who also does washing machines. It's built in-house from the chip up. And when they want to change something, they don't wait for the next model year. They just do it. That's the first trick, if you want to call it that. They stopped thinking of a car as a mechanical object with some electronics inside. They started thinking of it as a piece of consumer tech that happens to have wheels. Here's the second one, and this is the one that really stings for the old guard. Batteries. For decades, the engine was the thing. The block, the noise, the character. That was the moat. That was what took 100 years to master and what kept new competitors out. Well, guess what the moat is now? The battery. And China didn't just build battery factories. They bought up the mines, the refineries, the chemical processing plants, the entire chain from raw lithium in the ground to a finished cell on a production line. Most of the world's battery capacity right now sits inside Chinese-controlled supply chains. Not because nobody else tried, because nobody else committed to it for 20 years straight while it looked, frankly, boring and unprofitable. So when a European brand wants to build an EV today, there's a real chance the battery inside it, even with a proud German or French badge on the bonnet, was made by a Chinese supplier using Chinese refined materials on Chinese-designed production lines. That's not a rumor. That's just where the supply chain sits. You can be as patriotic about your car badge as you like. The chemistry inside doesn't care. Now let's talk about the bit that actually gets people angry in comment sections. Design. Walk around a motor show, and you'll hear it constantly. That looks like a Range Rover. That's basically a Porsche Macan. Someone's had a very close look at an Audi, and sometimes, yeah, the resemblance is a bit much. There have been actual lawsuits over it, actual court cases, actual settlements, actual admissions, but here's the uncomfortable part rivals don't love talking about. Even when a shape gets borrowed, what happens after that is where the real difference shows up. The interior tech, the screen response time, the voice assistant that genuinely understands a full sentence instead of 3 fixed commands. That part isn't copied from anyone. That part is where the money's actually gone. So you end up with cars that might look familiar from 20 feet away, but feel a full generation ahead the moment you sit inside and start using them. That's an uncomfortable thing for a badge-proud car enthusiast to accept. But sitting in one of these cars and pretending the tech isn't sharp, that's just not being honest with yourself. Then there's the pricing. And this is where trick starts to feel like the right word, because on the surface it looks almost impossible. A fully loaded electric SUV absolutely stacked with kit, leather, big screens, driver assistance, decent range, landing in UK showrooms for a price that would barely get you a mid-spec cloth seat version of the equivalent European model. How? Partly it's the battery supply chain we just talked about. When you own the mine, the refinery, and the factory, you're not paying anyone else's margin at every single step. Partly it's state support, and let's not pretend that's not real. Cheap land, cheap financing, local government backing for factories that Western competitors simply don't get offered. And partly, honestly, it's volume. China's domestic market is enormous, brutally competitive, and it forces manufacturers to fight on price at home before they ever think about exporting. By the time a car reaches Dover, it's already survived a price war that would have killed most European models before they left the factory gate. Rivals call it dumping. Regulators in Brussels have called it dumping too, officially, with tariffs to match. China calls it efficiency. The truth, like usual, sits somewhere in the argument between the two. But either way, the cars are here, they're competitive, and pretending otherwise doesn't change what's parked on the forecourt. Let's talk about MG for a second, because this one trips people up every time. MG, British name, British badge, British racing heritage going back to Abingdon and the whole lot. And yet the MG4, sitting on UK driveways right now, is a Chinese-engineered, Chinese-built product owned by SAIC. The name got bought. The factories moved. The badge stayed exactly where British buyers feel comfortable, and the entire operation underneath it changed completely. That's not a trick in the sneaky sense. It's public information. But it is a masterclass in understanding exactly how a market thinks, and exploiting that with total precision. British buyers trust a British name. So why build brand recognition from zero when you can just buy it and let 60 years of goodwill do the marketing for you? It's not just MG either. Other Chinese-owned or Chinese-built brands are quietly setting up shop across Europe using the same idea. Familiar naming, local-feeling marketing, dealership networks that look exactly like what buyers already trust, while the actual engineering, the batteries, the software, all comes from the same handful of industrial giants back home. There's another piece of this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's the speed of the engineering culture behind all of it. In a lot of legacy car companies, an idea has to survive committee after committee before it ever reaches a prototype. Layers of management, layers of caution, layers of, "we've always done it this way." That's not a criticism out of nowhere. It's how you protect a 100-year-old reputation. You don't want your badge attached to a mistake. But it also means slow, painfully slow sometimes. The newer Chinese manufacturers didn't inherit that caution because they didn't inherit 100 years of reputation to protect. Most of them are barely a decade or two old, so the culture inside those companies looks a lot more like a tech startup than a traditional car maker. Engineers pulling all-nighters, products shipped, then improved constantly after launch instead of being treated as finished on day one. Mistakes happen, sure, but they get fixed with an update instead of a 5-year wait for the next generation. That's a genuinely different way of building a car, and whether you love it or hate it, it's working. Then there's the way these cars actually get sold, which flips the traditional UK dealership model on its head. Walk into a lot of these newer showrooms and there's no haggling, no back and forth with a salesperson trying to hit a monthly target. Fixed pricing, online configuration, order it from your phone, track the build, get a delivery date. It's the Apple Store approach applied to a 2-ton electric SUV, and it's landed in the UK at exactly the moment buyers were already getting tired of the old-school forecourt experience. That matters more than people give it credit for. A generation of buyers who've never haggled for anything in their life, who buy a phone, a sofa, even a mortgage online, walking into a car showroom expecting the exact same thing. The Chinese brands built their sales model for that buyer from day one. A lot of the legacy dealers are still trying to retrofit theirs. Now, let's be fair and talk about where the doubt is real, because not everything about this is a smooth story. Safety reputation took years to build for these brands, and for good reason. Buyers remembered a period not that long ago when independent crash testing wasn't kind to some Chinese models at all. That reputation has shifted hard in recent years, with several models now scoring right up alongside the established players in independent testing. But reputation moves slower than engineering does, and there are still UK buyers who won't even test drive one of these cars because of what they remember from a decade ago, not what's actually true today. Residual values are the other honest concern. Nobody quite knows yet what a 5-year-old Chinese EV is going to be worth on the used market, because there simply isn't enough history yet to know for certain. Insurers have been cautious too, sometimes pricing these cars higher than you'd expect for what they cost new. purely because repair networks and parts availability are still being built out across the UK. That's not a trick, and it's not a flaw in the car itself. It's just what happens when an entire industry lands in a new market faster than the infrastructure around it can catch up. Now here's where it gets properly interesting, because the rivals aren't just standing there taking it. Tariffs are going up. Investigations into state subsidies are ongoing. Some manufacturers are quietly restructuring entire supply chains just to reduce how dependent they are on Chinese battery cells. There's talk, real talk, not just theory, about entire product lines being redesigned specifically to compete on price with cars that, 5 years ago, nobody in a boardroom in Munich or Stuttgart would have taken seriously. That right there tells you everything. You don't restructure a 100-year-old company's entire strategy because of something that isn't working. Some brands are doubling down on the badge instead, leaning harder into heritage, driving experience, the emotional stuff that a spec sheet can't measure. Others are quietly forming partnerships with the very Chinese manufacturers they're supposedly competing against, licensing platforms or battery tech because building it themselves from scratch would simply take too long. There's something almost poetic about that. The rival you're racing against becomes the supplier keeping your own product line alive. And politically, this isn't staying quiet either. Tariff decisions in the UK and across Europe are being watched closely by everyone in the industry, because they'll decide how much of this competition buyers actually get to see on their local forecourt versus how much gets priced out before it even arrives. Whichever way that goes, it won't be decided by which car is better. It'll be decided in a meeting room by people who've never driven either one. And it's worth zooming out for a second, because the UK isn't even the main event. It's one stop on a much bigger map. These brands have been testing themselves in markets that don't get nearly as much attention. Parts of South America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Places where there was no century-old domestic manufacturer to compete against. No entrenched brand loyalty to break down first. That's where a lot of the early lessons got learned, quietly, away from the cameras. By the time these companies turned their attention to Europe, they weren't arriving as beginners. They were arriving with years of real-world feedback already built into the product. That's a very different kind of entry than most people assume. It's not, new company tries its luck in a tough market. It's company that's already been tested at scale elsewhere, finally shows up somewhere everyone's paying attention. The UK just happened to be one of the more visible stages for something that had already been rehearsed, and that changes how you should think about what's coming next. This isn't a wave that crests and pulls back. It's closer to a company that spent a decade practicing somewhere else, and is only now stepping into the spotlight. So where does that leave the average car enthusiast in the UK, standing on a forecourt trying to work out what to actually buy? Honestly, it leaves you with more choice than you've had in decades, and a genuine question about what actually matters to you. If heritage badge and the sound of an engine that's been refined for a century still moves something in you, that's not going away. There will always be a place for it. But if you're the sort of buyer who cares about tech that keeps improving after you've bought the car, range that keeps getting better with every update, and a price tag that doesn't make your eyes water, pretending the Chinese brands aren't a serious option anymore is just stubbornness dressed up as loyalty. The old rivals aren't shocked because the cars are bad. They're shocked because the cars are good, and they didn't see it coming this fast. Tell me in the comments, would you actually put a Chinese-built EV on your driveway? Or is badge and heritage still the deciding factor for you? I read every single one of them. And if this got you thinking differently about what's sitting in UK showrooms right now, share it with the mate who still insists none of this is real competition. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There's a lot more of this coming.